Launching a business can take you on a journey unlike any other, filled with anticipation, uncertainty, and the constant search for answers. You're never quite sure what's coming next, which is why it helps to have a partner that does. Plan for the future of your business with the bank trusted by 50% of US-based, venture-backed tech and life science companies. Silicon Valley Bank, built for what's next.
Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us for our 2020 CIO Summit. For those of you that I haven't met before, I'm Shruti, Vice President of Business Development here at Sapphire Ventures, and I also lead our firm's global CIO and CXO networks. As Rami noted in his welcome comments earlier today, the essence of our CIO Summit, now in its 6th year, is to bring together a community of like-minded CIOs, IT and business leaders, together with startups and venture capitalists who are interested in collaborating for better innovation outcomes. And I'm really excited to talk with all of you today about the outcomes from an initiative we began in 2019 that we called the CIO Innovation Index, that really sought to quantify and build better data sets to describe how startups and the enterprise and CIO ecosystems were collaborating together. So what is the CIO Innovation Index and why did we even build it? For years, Sapphire has been collaborating with large enterprises and CIOs and CXOs, helping them parse signal from noise in identifying winning startups to meet and address major business and technology challenges. And the truth is that there are thousands of new VC-backed startups that are funded every year. And to a lot of CIOs and enterprises, they look and sound the same. So CIOs have been partnering with VCs like Sapphire to identify those needles in the haystack and to frankly avoid kissing a lot of frogs on their quest for winning startups. But there's been another persistent innovation challenge that CIOs have told us about. And that is around the lack of a strong data set and benchmark that allows CIOs to compare their startup engagement processes and outcomes relative to their peers across industries. So that's why we decided to build the index in 2019, a set of simple but foundational measures that help CIOs assess how their startup engagement practices are stacking up to external and other industry peers, and also help startups better figure out how to engage with enterprises. So what are some of the things that we found in the 2019 index? Overall, it was a tremendous validation of just how strong the interaction level is between startups and CIOs. For one, we established the industry's first ever statistic quantifying the specific share of startups within IT budgets, where CIOs told us that on a median basis, 10% of their IT budgets were going to products from VC-backed startups. We also heard from CIOs that they consistently felt that startups were performing better than their large established incumbents and larger established tech giants when it came to areas like faster product delivery, more flexible and agile product roadmaps, and more modern architecture. And at the same time, they also told us that startups needed to start doing better in the areas of providing international support and global scaling capabilities when working with larger customers. And last but not the least, a majority of CIOs told us that they were intrigued by startups and that they were interested in serving as advisors, investors, and beyond. Fast forward to 2020. What do we see in our 2020 index data? For one, to state the obvious, a global pandemic shook the world. And we decided to assess what the impact of COVID is on the inclination of CIOs to pursue digitization projects and to engage with startups. And The second key area we decided to look at was in going deeper around POCs, or proofs of concept, that CIOs do with startups. Because one of the areas of feedback we heard from CIOs was that one of the most actionable aspects of the 2019 Innovation Index was the data around the typical length, duration, success drivers of POCs with startups in moving them from discovery to full implementation. Thirdly, we see some interesting initial shifts in our 2020 data that seem to indicate that this interplay between large established incumbents and startups continues to be very dynamic within the enterprise IT landscape, with some initial signals that large players are starting to catch up and close the gap in some areas of emerging technology that were previously dominated by startups, areas such as AI and ML. More on that shortly. And last but not the least, we have seen a sharp increase in the number of CIOs telling us that they are today serving individually in an individual and personal capacity as advisors, investors, and mentors to startups, with a lot of CIOs also indicating that they would like to keep doing this in the future. All in all, we think that the tea leaves from our 2020 CIO Innovation Index bode very well for the startup community. And despite the turbulence that these last few months and this year has brought us and the uncertainty that looms ahead, we believe that startups will continue to be a fixture in enterprise IT innovation strategies and in the agendas of CIOs. So let's take a deeper look at some of the trends that we uncovered in our 2020 index. The first theme that I called out earlier was the impact of COVID, which is still evolving in some ways, but was clearly measured and captured in some of our index data. We asked CIOs what the impact of COVID was on their IT budgets, on their digitization plans, and of course on their appetite for startup engagement. And we were surprised by the results, but in a very positive way. For one, over 80% of CIOs told us that they intend to keep stable or even marginally increase in some cases their overall IT budgets, which we think is a major sign of resilience of digital agendas in large organizations overall. We also asked CIOs about the pace of digitization within their businesses and how that was going to be impacted. And yet again, over 2/3 of CIOs told us that with COVID, even factoring that in, that they will be either maintaining the existing pace of their business digitization projects, and in some cases, even accelerating digital transformation projects as a way to respond to the new realities of COVID. And a lot of the acceleration around digital transformation projects that is being cited by CIOs in our study is in areas like customer support, sales and marketing, customer engagement, supply chain, and of course within core IT as well. And a lot of the sessions that you are going to see and hear about during our CIO Summit are going to feature perspectives from CIOs and CXOs and other business and IT leaders from companies such as Under Armour, Citrix, Aegon, Wells Fargo, and so many others, where we will hear the C-suite talk about how they are rapidly changing their playbooks of how they're going to engage with startups, of how they're going to accelerate digital projects as a result of COVID. And last but not the least, we asked CIOs to indicate whether COVID had in any way impacted their appetite for engaging with startups. And to our very pleasant surprise, over 80% of CIOs said that the crisis has in no way negatively impacted their appetite to engage with startups. And some of them are even more likely to engage with startups now as they look for new approaches for dealing with the new normal. And in addition to that, 75% of CIOs said that startups played a very meaningful role in making that really quick and often abrupt pivot to remote work. Overall, we believe that this is a really strong message for innovators in the startup community and also to CIOs more broadly that are trying to understand the balance between fiscal discipline, innovation, and digitization within their IT agendas going forward. A second key theme that we went deeper into understanding in our 2020 data was the theme of POCs and how proofs of concepts play out within large enterprises. Some of the interesting data and the benchmarks we established in 2019 were around areas like length, duration, and success drivers of POCs. For example, we found that a majority of POCs typically take more than 3 months to complete. But we also found in our 2019 data that shorter POCs were correlated with higher levels of POC success. In our 2019 data, we went deeper into understanding the motivations that drive CIOs to engage with startups for proofs of concept. And we heard that the number one motivator is in further testing product performance and doing due diligence around security and compliance. And last but not the least, in actually assessing and identifying the specific use cases that that startup's technology could be leveraged for going forward. We think POCs are really critical in moving startup technology from the test driving and experimentation phase to full implementation. And that's also in keeping with the fact that over 91% of the CIOs in our study this year told us that they always or typically will make a startup go through a POC or a proof of concept before full implementation. And in these times of strained and re-examined IT budgets, we also decided to look at the payment models for proofs of concept. And we found that a majority of CIOs, over 60%, said that they do not currently have to pay for startup POCs. And we think that this actually highlights the fact that POCs with startups, especially in this current fiscally disciplined environment, is a great way for CIOs and enterprises to test drive the innovation coming from startups and figure out if that really should be taken to scale within the broader enterprise. The third key shift and the third key trend that we have watched in our CIO Innovation Index that we measured in 2019 and that we continue to measure in 2020 was this interplay of how CIOs bring in both startups as well as large established players into their IT landscape, and the ongoing dance, whether it's competition, co-opetition, or something in between, that takes place between VC-backed startups that are trying to make their way into the IT landscape, and of course the large established incumbents that have had their space there for a long time. And one of the interesting shifts that we saw was that in certain areas that were previously dominated by startups, CIOs were now more likely to say that they were working with those large established players than they were in the past. For example, in 2019, a whole host of CIOs indicated that they were more likely, significantly more likely in some cases, to work with startups over established vendors in areas like artificial intelligence and machine learning, augmented analytics, augmented data, virtual reality, and Internet of Things. And of course, in certain areas, the equation was reversed, where we had more CIOs telling us that they were engaging with large established vendors in areas like cybersecurity, public cloud infrastructure, and sales and digital marketing technology. That interplay is always going to be ongoing. But one of the interesting shifts that we noticed in our 2020 data was that this year, 51% of CIOs indicated that in addition to working with startups for AI and ML, they are also working with large established players for AI and ML initiatives. This is a sharp increase from the 36% of CIOs who told us last year that they are engaging with a large vendor for AI and ML projects. And as large players move aggressively to stake their claims in the AI and ML space, it's clear that through an aggressive stance of M&A, robust product investments, and go-to-market capabilities, that they're certainly not sitting still when it comes to pushing ahead and closing that gap with startups in areas like AI and ML. And lastly, one of the key themes that really came out in our 2020 data was how CIOs continue to be intrigued to work with startups on a personal and individual level. Again, we asked CIOs whether they are today serving as board members, investors, or mentors, or just as advisors with startups. And we saw a sharp increase in the number of CIOs who said that they are working with startups as investors today. Last year, that number was about 11%, and this year, over a third of CIOs mentioned that they are individually investors with startups. And we also had a majority of CIOs, and a larger number than last year, indicate that they would be actively interested in working with startups as advisors or mentors. And some of the benefits that CIOs cite of engaging on that personal level with startups range from obviously diversifying their professional networks to getting better exposure to the development of disruptive and emerging technologies that could be useful to them in their own companies, and also in just gaining better know-how of how to rapidly scale a quickly growing organization. So what does all of this data mean for CIOs and the road ahead for them? For one, we believe that engaging with startups is no longer an option for innovation-minded CIOs who want innovation to be a key part of their careers and a key theme in their playbooks. With a majority of CIOs telling us that they are equally or more likely to work with startups, and also a majority of CIOs telling us that they see startups being a key to helping define the next normal, we believe that working closely with the venture capital and the startup ecosystem is really a necessary part of every CIO's playbook for innovation. The second key area of data that clearly came out in our index data was just how important it is to keep moving along startup POCs from discovery to implementation and widespread adoption. So we would advise CIOs to make sure that despite this time of virtual disintermediation and virtual work, that they make sure that the leadership and the processes are in place within their organizations to keep moving POCs along as they assess different startup vendors and move them over to adoption. And last but not the least, this is the time for CIOs to defend digitization and innovation to their company leadership. As a CIO, as an IT leader, when you are working with your company's business leadership, when you are talking to your board, make sure they understand just how important the continued pace of digital transformation and startup collaboration is going to be to the ongoing sustenance and proliferation of your business. And last but not the least, what does all of this mean for the innovators, the true entrepreneurs in our ecosystem, the startups? Taking a step back and looking at all of this data at the highest level, we think that in this continued moment of turbulence, this is a great time for startups to recognize that they are a key ingredient in the CIO's innovation playbook, and to really ride that wave, but to ride it thoughtfully by helping CIOs and the enterprise ecosystem better understand how your specific solutions are actually helping cater to the needs of the moment and helping organizations pivot into this new normal and respond to a lot of the crises being created by COVID and the development of the new normal. Second of all, it's important to note that in certain areas like AI and ML, a lot of the larger established players are starting to show up more frequently in CIO playbooks and in their project agendas. So now is not a time to rest on your laurels. Even if you've had a significant product advantage as a quickly growing startup in the past, make sure that you are staying 3 steps ahead of the competition and not being complacent when it comes to looking around the corner to your large enterprise competitors. And lastly, think about engaging the CIO community in non-commercial, non-traditional modes. Because a vast majority of CIOs are telling us that they're actively interested in working with startups as advisors, as investors, as mentors, it is very important that you reach out to them not only as commercial partners and as customers, but you embrace them as advisors, as mentors, and turn them into some of your biggest evangelists and champions. And that, in a 15-minute nutshell, is the essence of what our 2020 Innovation Index data bodes both for the CIO community as well as for the startup ecosystem. Thank you again for being a part of this dialogue, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of the summit.